Hey guys, Jason Scudellari with CPP, and today we're going to be talking about steering, brakes, and suspension for all you guys that are set up with a Mustang II. Let's get started. So here's our entry level for you guys that are on a budget that just want a nice ride. Conventional coil, gas shock, upper and lower control arms, and all the hardware. So let's get that installed. Here's the hardware. As you see, we have an acorn on one side, a nylock on the other. And that is because you would never get a bolt this long perfectly true, so we get these machined. All we want to do is get these snugged up. We don't want any bind in our control arm, and that's why we put a nylock on one side. That way it will lock itself down. Again, we're just going to get those snugged up. We want this nice and smooth like that. There you go. Go ahead and put our upper control arm on. If you come over here, we index these, so that way your bolt can't slide back and forth as you're driving. We're going to start in the neutral position. This is all for your caster adjustment. You can also shim these out for your camber. Same rule of thumb on these. We're just gonna snug these up so there's no bind in the upper control arm. Everything's nice and smooth. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and get the coil in. Make sure you get the end of your coil lined up with the pocket down below. And we'll get our spindle ready. All right, so we just wrapped up our entry-level setup. Still a great bang for the buck, but if you are looking for a little more tunability, you can go ahead and take that gas shock out, get yourself a dual adjustable shock with compression and rebound, 19 settings per side. You can really fine tune that suspension. But we are wrapped up here. We're gonna go ahead and tear down this and move on to the airbag setup. It's a complete kit. We have to change out the lower control arm, and there's a little bit more involved. We got a bump stop mount and a shock mount. So typically, most of these Mustang II front ends have a much bigger frame rail. This is probably one of the smaller ones. This is made for a Nova 62 to 67, but we had it out. I had it all jigged up, so that's why we're using it. Still all the same geometry, just the frame rails are a little bit smaller, but we'll go ahead and get this bolted on. And this is the same idea as the last setup. You just want to get these snugged up. You don't want nothing to bind. You want everything to be nice and smooth. All right, so with the lower control arm in place, we're gonna go ahead and get the bag in. Here's the area we're gonna have where your fitting would be. We're not gonna install it since we're just kind of demonstrating, but this is the area you want facing towards the rear of the car. That will get all this geometry correct. And this just fits right into the pocket. Okay, before we tighten that completely up, let's get the bottoms. And there's different areas down here depending on what kind of front end you're running, and they kind of just give you every option needed. All right, let's make sure that all cycles nice and smoothly. So this is a weld-on bump stop. We're not gonna weld it on. I'm just gonna show you how it would work. Get your bump stop in here. You would cycle your airbag all the way up. What you do is you want your bump stop to hit the control arm on the compression stroke about a ½ inch before the bag bottoms out. That way you're not gonna damage the bag. We got a shock mount here. Snug that up. And then we got a top mount. Through there, get that on there. And this bolt's on there. It's a Mustang II setup, but it's for a 62 to 67 Nova. So the frame rails are pretty small on these. Typically these frame rails are much bigger, which this mount would work perfect. But this is gonna be what limits our downstroke. So we wanna make sure you get that in the right position too. And then once you got all that done, go ahead and put your spindle on. And then we'll bring the control arm down. I would always put some clamps on there, cycle all the suspension both ways just to be sure everything's set up right before you go welding that on and bolting that on. So there's a downstroke right there. There's your upstroke. All right, so we've done conventional coils and we've done airbags. We're gonna move on to coilovers now. And this is something I'm really familiar with. I currently have a truck or two with coilovers on there, and I've run airbags actually on one of them. I just prefer the coilover. You can really get the car down low. Once you get everything adjusted properly, the shock and the tension on the coil, you get that ride height really nice, and the ride quality is awesome. You get really good performance out of it. So again, we're gonna have to start with a different control arm. So we'll start there. Same exact machine bolt and washer setup. All right. Nice and smooth. So we're gonna go ahead and put our coilover in. We're gonna use a dual adjustable shock, which has got your compression and rebound. You got your locking nut here, the collar, which your spring rides on. Then your washer, which makes it a little easier to adjust. And then your coil. And this just sits in the pocket just like your conventional coil does. Really simple. Bushings, washer, nut. Go ahead and feed our bolts through. So be sure to put your knobs in an area that's easy to gain access to, so when you are out of the track or just driving on the streets, you can get to them to adjust your rebound and compression easily. So we're just gonna add a little tension to the spring. And obviously once you get it down on the ground, you'll fine tune everything to where you want your ride height to be. Again, we're using a drop spindle. All right, there we go. So with this all in place, we're actually gonna go a couple steps further. We're gonna talk about manual and power racks, different brakes, install that stuff, and then sway bars also. So let's move on. All right, guys, so we got a couple of different racks laying out here. We got a manual rack and a power rack. Our car that this clip would go in is a 62 to 67 Nova, probably weighs anywhere from 3,000 to 3,300 pounds. I'm gonna go with the power rack. One, I wanna throw this thing around a track. Two, it's gonna make life a lot simpler parking and just everyday driving, so I prefer a power rack. Also, we have a couple different bushings out here. We got rubber, and then we got our Poly Plus, and then we got our hardware kit, and we got two different tie rods depending on what your Mustang 2 is going in, different lengths. So let's get the rack installed and move on to the sway bar. All right, we'll go ahead and put our tie rod end on. So a few more accessories we have for rack and pinion setups are extenders for those guys who have wider frames. We got our double D shaft coming in black and polished, U-joints. We also have rod ends for the guys that are using more than 2 joints to get from your rack and pinion all the way up to your steering column. Another thing I want to point out is our rack and pinions are already equipped with -6 AN fittings, so it makes it real easy to go from your rack to your pump. All right, so we got 3 different sway bars laid out here. We got this small one, we got this one which is much bigger in diameter, and our third bar, it's a bigger bar, it's our high clearance bar, it's fully adjustable. We're gonna run that one on this one because high clearance, bigger tire. All 3 sway bars run the rod ends that are adjustable, comes with all the hardware. The Poly Plus and the billet mount are for the high clearance bar, which we'll be using and mounting now. All right, let's get this bar all set up. We're gonna go ahead and use these billet mounts that have a Zerk fitting that feeds the grease through the bushing. The bushing has these little pockets that capture the grease. I'm just gonna leave this a little loose, that way I can center the bar up and get the rod ends all on there. So we got 2 adjustments here. The rear one here will make it softer, and then we're gonna go in the front one that will make it a little stiffer. Rod ends on, we'll go ahead and tighten the bar up. There we go. All right, so let's talk about spindles real quick before we get into the brakes. Here we have our standard Mustang II spindle. Here's our modular spindle. This will house any of our brakes, from the small ones all the way up to the big ones, the way the design is to hold the bracket on. So for our modular spindles, we got our aluminum hubs. They come in most popular bolt patterns. Races already pressed in. Again, very good spindle. And here's my favorite. This is a Corvette style spindle, and this is the one we're actually gonna use, so I'm gonna swap them out. And as I'm swapping them out, I'll tell you the benefits of this spindle and why we're using it. All right, so Corvette style spindle, it actually houses a C7 Corvette hub. It's multi-pattern, sealed bearing, maintenance free, and what makes it really easy, 3 bolts holds the whole thing on instead of tiny little bearings, packing them, greasing them, using a carder pin. You don't use any of that stuff. This is the way to go. All right, so another benefit of this spindle hub setup is you can run the stock track with, or you can bring in a total of 1 inch, ½ inch per side, 1/4 inch at a time. And that's always good for those guys out there maybe have an offset of their wheel that may be rubbing on the wheel well a little bit during full lock. You can bring that in a little bit. So we got a 1/4 inch there, 1/4 inch here. That's stock track width. If you just want to go in 1/4 inch per side, take that off. You want to do the total, take the other spacer off. Really cool setup. And again, maintenance free, sealed bearing, good to go. So we finally made it to the brake portion of our Mustang II display. And we got a couple different selections here. This is our small brake for a stock spindle. We got our modular small brake. These are great for budget builds. Then we got our big brake for the modular spindle. And then we got what we're using. We got our Corvette rotor and caliper to go with our Corvette spindle and hub. So we're gonna get that installed now. All right, so don't forget your spacers since we are at stock track width. If we went 1/4 inch in, you'd split them. If we went 1/2 inch in, you'd put them on the one side. All right, that completes our Mustang II suspension, steering, and brake setup. So when you're ready for your Mustang II parts or any other parts for your classic car or truck, give us a call or visit classicperform.com.